Tonight on KQED Newsroom, their tents are being torn down. Where do they go next? We ask an Oakland city leader about options for people living in the massive Wood Street encampment. Plus, new legislation lives and dies this week by a stroke of the governor's pen. Which bills will he sign into law and which are getting tossed aside? KQED's politics and government team is here to catch us up on all the important races and ballot measures in the coming midterm elections. And we keep our feet on the ground while wandering in space in this week's Something Beautiful. Coming to you from KQED headquarters in San Francisco this Friday, September 30th, 2022. Hello and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Priya David Clemens. Out of all of the states in the nation, California has the highest concentration of people who don't have a home. The latest count was 2 years ago, and it indicated that 161,000 people in the state were unhoused. Experts in the field tell us that figure is a serious undercount. They say the true numbers are much larger, and the problem is, in part, a serious lack of housing across the state. Right now, we're seeing this issue play out in real time. According to the San Francisco Chronicle, the largest tent city in Northern California is the Wood Street Encampment in Oakland, stretching more than 25 city blocks. Caltrans is in the process of clearing out the site, which was home to an estimated 200 residents when evictions began this summer. But when people are pushed out, where do they go? Joining me now is Oakland City Council member for District 3, which encompasses downtown and West Oakland, Carroll, Fife. Thank you so much for being here with us, Council member.
Thank you for having me.
So what is going to happen now with the people who are being evicted from this encampment?
There are phases of evictions that are happening that started weeks ago. So there are offers of shelter that are coming through our homelessness team. And as it stands, there are just not enough shelter beds in the city of Oakland to house everyone that needs a place to stay. So that's where we are right now. They're trying to figure out how do we keep people off the streets and give them appropriate housing. And it's a struggle.
Let's talk a little bit about what the problems were at Wood Street and have been. We spoke with a resident there, a neighbor of Wood Street, and here's what he had to say about the concerns.
With the safety issue with the fire, well, I haven't been directly affected. I've heard the news, the multiple fires going down there. Obviously, it's a huge safety and a huge concern for the city. Having this persistence, as far as going and driving through, it's just down the block. I tend to avoid that whole area, not necessarily out of fear, but it's just a mess. It's just too much to deal with. So I'd rather just drive the other direction.
You know, it seems like we're really caught between a rock and a hard place. We have people who need a place to live. We don't have enough housing for them. When they live on the streets, then there ends up being trash and debris and unsafe conditions like fires. What are we supposed to do here?
Well, I appreciate hearing that from the neighbor that lived in that area. That's my constituent. And unfortunately, I believe that the fires, the trash, the debris, all of the things that you listed are symptoms of a larger issue. Symptoms of not having the housing that is necessary for people with no to low incomes. So if we don't address our housing situation first, then we're going to continue to have issues. And so one of the things that I've offered as a solution is to open up the unused acreage at the Army base, 8 acres where we can have immediate urgency housing for this particular population. And another one that's been entrenched in West Oakland for several years. And that's what I'm fighting for and we'll be pushing for at the October 4th City Council meeting.
You know, it seems like maybe there are some spaces that could be converted into housing. What are the obstacles there?
That is what I'm trying to figure out. I've been on the council for 18 months, a little over 18 months. And when I first came into office, I was told by our tax collector that there are over 600 vacant parcels that could be utilized and redeveloped for emergency homeless housing or affordable housing. We have every single agency, the school district, the city of Oakland, the county of Alameda, that have vacant spaces. We just need to have the political will and the courage to push to utilize that for the housing that's needed.
I want to read a quote, something you said to the Oakland Side, which is another journalism outlet. You point out in this quote that this is not just an Oakland problem. You see this as a systemic problem and one that is representative of where we are in society. You said, sometimes I look at the mess that is just society right now and think that what we're witnessing is the end of an empire. It's every major urban city in the country and every state where working people earning a minimum wage can't afford a 2-bedroom apartment. But we're experiencing some of the brunt of it because we're one of the world's most expensive places to live. We're realizing the impact, the cumulative effect of the defunding on our social safety net, quite frankly. People are scared and angry and frustrated, and now we're at a place where it's a crisis and no one knows what to do.
I mean, yeah, that woman was brilliant. That is where we are. And that's why what we have to do is something different than we've ever done. This is not just a situation that Oakland is dealing with. This is global. I've been in conversation with the UN rapporteur on housing, and she is saying the same thing for visiting Spain and Bangladesh, and places all over the world are experiencing the financialization of housing and its after effects. That's what we're seeing. So if we don't change that formula, we will continue to go on this death spiral where no one is safe. No one is safe. We were okay when homelessness was tucked away and no one could see it. But this is our collective ignorance of being just okay with ignoring a problem for so long. And now we're at crisis levels. And now we're all looking at each other like, blaming each other, pointing the finger. This is this agency's issue. This is this agency's issue. And we've got to come together and do something drastically different than what's been done so far.
What is that drastic something different, and how do resident citizens get involved with that?
What they've been doing, because what this is doing for Oakland residents is radicalizing them. And I don't think that our elected officials or people who have the opportunity to do something are recognizing people are angry and scared. And I'm talking about unsheltered people and sheltered people. So that something different is we have to decommodify housing. One of the things that I'm bringing forward is a way to utilize more of our resources from the state and federal level to be able to create mixed income and wraparound supportive housing. And that will be coming forward. I'm trying to pull together electeds from all over the state, but we're having a convening in the second week of October to have this discussion.
All right. Councilmember Carroll, Fife, thank you for being here and for sharing your insight on the issue.
Thank you.
This week, Governor Newsom signed several bills into law which are intended to expand and protect abortion services. The bills restrict cooperation with other states' investigations into abortions and provide support for low-income abortion services as well as for those traveling from other states for the procedure. Also, in a few weeks, Californians will vote on Proposition 1. Prop 1 would amend our state constitution to turn the choice to have an abortion or use contraception into a fundamental individual right. I'm joined now by part of our KQED Politics and Government team, Senior Editor Scott Schaefer, reporter Guy Marzorati, and correspondent Marisa Lagos. Thank you all for being here.
Good to be here.
Yeah, it's good to see you. So elections are coming up soon. We sent a reporter into the field to hear a little bit about what people are thinking and feeling about abortion in particular right now, both in terms of the legislation and also in terms of Prop 1. So let's listen to that.
I'm very freaked out about all the abortion stuff. And I'm pregnant, so I am having a very interesting reaction to all the safety that's happening around women who actually need abortions for it to save their lives, people who have ectopic pregnancies. I know a lot of people who have had that happen to them, so that is probably my biggest concern.
I wouldn't say I know too much about that either. I haven't really looked at I just got my packet about the elections. I haven't read it. But anything that protects that right, I'm 100% for. But I have to look at the details.
So abortion is polling as one of the top concerns for people in the state, and Governor Newsom has made it a central point of his conversation, not just here in the state, but also nationally, taking that message across the nation. Scott, tell us what's going on here and where this stands.
Yeah, well, historically, Republicans have used the choice abortion, pro-life issue to their benefit, going all the way back to Ronald Reagan in 1980. They used it to raise money, scare voters, mobilize voters. And Donald Trump did it in 2016, and then he promised to put a conservative majority on the Supreme Court. Lo and behold, he did. And then with the Dobbs decision, what was theoretical, the striking down of Roe, became very real. And so we've got all these states now that are passing fairly extreme bans, in some cases without exceptions, for rape, incest, and the life of the mother. And so now this is an issue that's really mobilizing women. We heard in those two clips a couple of women who are very concerned about that issue. And we're seeing billboards that Newsom is paying for in South Dakota, basically telling women in states where abortion is outlawed, hey, here in California, we support women's right to choose and access to reproductive services and so on. And so it's now shifted, and we're seeing increase in registration of women voting. We saw in Kansas 59%, a red state, 59% of people turning down a statewide measure to restrict abortion there. And so it's really kind of turning the tables, and Newsom is using that to elevate his own image nationally, standing up and saying, where's my party? Why aren't we hearing more? The Republicans are winning. They're framing the issues. And he kind of got a little bit of a pushback on that on Labor Day. President Biden telling the governor to sign a bill on farm worker unionization. Nancy Pelosi also pressured him, labor union leaders, Latinos. And so that was a rare instance of a president of his own party telling him what to do. And in fact, this week he did. He relented.
He did sign that farm worker bill, right? And so that pressure from Biden, from Pelosi, from Kamala
Harris,
is that a little bit of a pushback to Newsom presenting himself on the national stage?
It could be, but it also is very much in line with Democratic politics. And I think in some ways it was surprising that Newsom was opposed to that bill. I mean, he had made it clear he does own a winery, and obviously agriculture is a big industry in this state. But the truth is, drive up the I-5, Newsom does not have big ag on his side, or little ag, or medium ag, right? There's a lot of anger at Democrats in general in the farm communities. And so I think that, yes, Biden and others might have been sort of signaling back off a little bit on some of the stuff you've been saying. We've seen him challenge the Florida governor to a debate, which neither of them is on a ballot against one another. But I think, I think Newsom really, it's not out of line to say that it appears that a lot of the decisions he's made legislatively are with an eye toward the national politics, right? The farm worker bill, we saw him veto the safe injection site bill that would allow people to essentially do drugs under the eyes of medical professionals. We've also seen him veto some bills that you would have thought he would support, like expanding kindergarten to be mandatory, like expanding unemployment to undocumented immigrants. In both of those cases, he's warning about the possibility for a recession. And I think that you have to think about with an eye towards the national sort of news, because if in a year California is in the red, that's not going to look good if he does run for president in 24 or even in 28.
So he's watching out for those bottom line numbers
stuff,
as well,
exactly.
right? Okay. So speaking of money, there is a lot of money sloshing around at this time of year, right? With all of the campaigning for different ballot measures. Guy, we just had a deadline drop yesterday where everyone had to report their filings. What are you finding out about campaign finance?
Right. Well, on the ballot measure side, it's really this sports betting debate, these two initiatives to legalize sports betting in California that are running away with all types of spending and fundraising records. Prop 26, which would legalize in-person betting at tribal casinos. Prop 27 that legalize online betting. And I know there's a lot of confusion about...
Let me pause you there for a second, because our reporter actually went out in the field and asked about this as well, and heard exactly that. So let's take a listen to this soundbite from a San Franciscan who's talking about this sports betting measure in particular.
My thought, honestly, is that I'm very confused as to what they actually mean. I feel like both the ad campaigns are saying the same thing, but obviously one says yes, one says no. So I wish there was a little bit easier access to information on exactly what those propositions mean.
Well, he is getting his wish, because here you are.
I feel this guy.
Yes. No, I mean, the amount of ad spending that you've seen, and as that voter notes, so much of it about this idea of what tribes in California support. Most large tribes in the state are getting behind Prop 26 because it would legalize sports betting at their casinos. But Prop 27, which was really backed by online gambling companies throughout the country, they have gotten a few tribes to support Prop 27. It's created a lot of confusion. Just Prop 27 alone, $285 million spent for and against it. Most expensive ballot measure campaign in American history.
Really?
But all of that has not really mattered to voters. I mean, there's been polling out recently from the Public Policy Institute of California asking what measures on the ballot voters actually care about. very few said Prop 27 was something that would actually impact them compared to something like Prop 1, compared to an abortion issue where you don't need to spend $100 million to have voters care about abortion this year.
Because it's not even going to change the law, right? It's just going to enshrine it in the Constitution.
That's right. Well, let's talk about EVs as well, because electric vehicles are also on the ballot.
Yeah, this race is heating up. This is Proposition 30, which would raise taxes on wealthy Californians in order to fund more electric vehicles, more chargers. And it's created this really strange alliance where you have Lyft as the top funder for this. They have a mandate to meet as far as electric vehicles. They want the state to maybe subsidize that a little bit. But on the other hand, you have Governor Newsom's come out against it, despite all the climate initiatives he's put forward.
Why is that?
I think he feels like, you know, any governor would want control over kind of how the tax picture plays out. And I think Newsom perhaps sees this as one company taking over and trying to figure out the tax system to their advantage. It also needs to be noted that the teachers associations, the teachers union is against Prop 30, obviously a key ally of the governor. They really have a lot at stake because of how tax revenue is allocated towards education. We're starting to see more wealthy Californians throw money behind the No on 30 campaign. That'll be something to watch.
Well, and, I think coming back to the national conversation about Newsom, I mean, here we've had this huge budget surplus, and there's rebates going out to taxpayers, and now you've got this thing on the ballot to raise yet again another 1.75% on people earning $2 million or more. And already California has by far the highest income tax in the country.
You think there's some tax implication pushback?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And, so there could be real world, implications for that in terms of people leaving the state. I mean, it's an incredibly small number of taxpayers who fund a lot of the general fund. And if you keep, it's not infinite. People aren't going to stick around forever with their income tax going up, up, up. And our sales tax is also pretty high. And so I think that's, in terms of the national message, I think Newsom doesn't want to be seen as, supporting a tax increase at a time that he's giving money, rebating money, and the tax rate's already so high.
That being said, I'll just say the teachers' unions had no problem raising taxes on wealthy Californians multiple times on the ballot, as long as it's going to the right cause.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, well, let's look at what the latest PPIC, Public Policy Institute of California poll has been saying what Californians seem to care about most. Right. So Californians are saying that jobs, the economy, and inflation are their top concern, followed by homelessness, which we just spoke about earlier in the show, housing costs, right? If you put those two together, those are pretty close to that top concern and related to jobs, economy, and inflation. So I want to know how these themes that Californians are focused on are playing out in national races. And I know, Marisa and Scott, you've both been following some congressional races here in California. Scott, let's start with you. You've been talking to voters in Southern California. Yeah,
I was in Riverside County, where there's a very interesting race between Ken Calvert, a 30-year incumbent who has had a pretty safe district, but with redistricting, suddenly he's got Palm Springs and Rancho Mirage and Indian Wells and La Quinta, more Democratic leaning and with a lot more gay voters, and so he's having to pivot. But in answer to your question, you have really two competing narratives right now going on. I mean, congressional races are really about what's happening nationally, and you've got the Republicans not wanting to talk about abortion. They want to talk about gas prices and inflation and the stock market and mortgage rates, and those trends were looking better for Democrats, but now they seem to be shifting a little bit. Mortgage rates are back up, the market is back down, gas prices are back up, and so Democrats want to be talking about abortion. They want to be talking about the threats to democracy, and Trump is, and they're branding candidates as Trumpy, and the economy, but they're framing it in a different way. And I think so. You've got these two competing narratives.
Marisa, you've been following the David Valadao race in the Central Valley, and also Michelle Steele. Those are both incumbent Republicans. And she's down in Southern California.
Yeah, that's an Orange County race, and I think they're very different districts, but one thing in common: a majority in the Central Valley, it's Latino voters. The other one is the most Asian district in the state. So, I mean, to Scott's point, the other thing that Republicans really want to talk about is crime and public safety, but you'll notice that's not even in the top issues on that poll, and I think that's really different than where we were 6 months ago. So the question becomes, the questions about democracy, about abortion, and just sort of the argument that Democrats are making that, we've done a lot to try to tackle inflation. We just passed this huge package of bills.
Inflation Reduction Act.
Yeah, so I think it's really a messaging battle at this point, and a turnout battle, which always happens, especially in midterm races.
And fundraising.
All right, well, Guy, just over a week until voting begins. How are you seeing the campaigns reaching out to voters?
Well, to Marisa's point about the messaging in a lot of these swing districts, look, I think at the start of the year, Democrats had two issues. One, they had to motivate their base in a midterm year when as Trump kind of maybe seemed to fade from the scene, there were questions about, will Democrats still care? They've done that. Honestly, the Dobbs decision did that. People are engaged. You talk about that. You talk about the PPIC polling. Democrats care about this election. The second challenge was how to find independent voters who have soured on Biden, how to win them over. And I think what you've seen, one of the more interesting ads I saw in that Valadeo district was Rudy Salas, the Democrat there, a Spanish language ad that started by attacking Valadeo on abortion, but then quickly pivoted to talk about what Rudy Salas had done to lower healthcare costs. I think getting that closing pitch around the economy to win over independent voters, they've motivated the base. You can check that off. What's left for Democrats to do is really win over more of those voters who are have soured on the president.
Yeah, and it's certainly jobs, like kitchen table issues are really top of mind for people. But on the abortion issue, it's a little more tricky in some of these races. Rudy Salas, is in a district that's purple. Trends Democrat in a lot of ways. But down in L.A., there's a race with Mike Garcia, the Republican, very conservative, against Christy Smith. And abortion plays a little differently among Latino voters. There tends to be support.
More of a religious space.
There's a lot more religion that gets into that conversation.
It's how are you talking about it? Are you talking about rights being taken away? That polls very well, even with some Republicans in California. So I think a lot of it is framing.
Okay, well, let's talk about regional and local elections. Scott, let's start with a discussion of the Attorney General race and also the Controller's race.
Yeah, well, the AG is one of the, there's an old joke that AG stands for aspiring governor. It's an important job. It's a high profile job. And we've had kind of a revolving door in California in that position. I mean, Kamala Harris was there until she got elected to the Senate. Becerra was there. Now he's in the Biden administration. Rob Bonta, a Democrat from the East Bay, is now there and running for election for a full 4-year term. And, as Marisa said, crime was a big issue, a top of mind issue a few months ago, as was COVID. Now, not so much. And so you've got Rob Bonta, who is a kind of a traditional liberal Democrat, supports a lot of the criminal justice reforms, against the death penalty, that kind of thing, running against Nathan Hochman, who is a moderate Republican, Los Angeles attorney, former U.S. attorney, prosecutor, running against him. And, the problem for Hochman is, years ago he might have done well against Bonta. But in this state, if you have an R next to your name, it's really difficult. He is talking about crime and punishment in a more traditional way, but not in an extreme way that, we hear from some Republicans. So it's just so difficult, I think, for a Republican to break through at the statewide level.
And I'll just put in a little plug that in a couple of weeks we're going to be speaking here with Lanhee Chen, who is running for controller, hopefully Malia Cohen as well, and you're going to be hosting that show on October 14th, I believe. Guy, let's turn to the mayor's races in San Jose and Oakland.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about public safety. Those are looming large in both of those races, but maybe in some unconventional ways. I don't think it's simply which candidate says, I'm going to hire more police is guaranteed to win. In fact, KQED did an Oakland mayoral forum, and candidates were trying to outdo each other on who was going to fund more violence prevention. That really seemed to be the issue candidates focused on. And in San Jose, same thing. I mean, look, both candidates, Cindy Chavez, Matt Mahan, have focused on staffing up police. There also are kind of growing pressures to move some investigations out of the San Jose Police Department when it comes to internal investigations. And then questions, frankly, about the city budget. I mean, police staffing, police benefits have crippled the city in the past, and I think that's kind of going to be looming over this public safety debate in that race.
Very interesting. All right, Marisa, last, definitely not least, let's touch on the San Francisco DA's race. So Chesa Boudin is out. We currently have DA Brooke Jenkins in, and she's fighting to keep the seat. So
she is, and she's had a real short runway to do so. I think things are looking pretty strong for her. She's being challenged by John Hamasaki, very dyed-in-the-wool progressive, has a history of being very combative on Twitter, and is, I think, getting a little blowback on that. I think that in some ways this is one of those races where there's not going to be a lot of name ID. People were either paying attention to the recall, and if they supported it, which most people did, they probably backed Jenkins. I think Hamasaki's challenge is going to be breaking through that and convincing voters right after they ousted a progressive, do they want to give somebody else like that another chance? There's Joe Veronese is in the race too. The polling I've seen, which is internal campaign polls, has not looked super strong for him. I would say at this point it's Jenkins to lose.
And this is also, whatever happens here, is a bit of a reflection on Mayor Breed, right?
Absolutely.
She backed, yeah. So let's talk about that, and then just go into the fact that we have Mayor Breed coming in for a town hall next week.
Yeah, I mean, I think at this point, Mayor Breed is in a tough position. She's got the police chief, the half of the school board that she put on there after that recall, the DA she appointed. We're very excited to sit down with her next week. It's a political breakdown at KQED Live. We're going to have an hour with her to really talk about these issues and kind of how she sees all of this. I think Mayor Breed grew up in public housing. she came from a tough neighborhood, and she's really been pretty tough on crime compared to historically how the city's looked at things.
Okay. Well, we do have some other resources for folks as well. Yes. Guy, you are going to be moderating a San Jose mayor's race coming up. We also have the voter guide that is out for people to
check that out.
/voter guide. Let's do it.
All right. So lots of places there for people to learn more before this election actually happens.
And we should say there's also going to be some Ballots and Brews events, so check out our KQED Live page for more ways to educate yourself.
All right, Marisa, Guy, and Scott, thank you for being here.
Thanks so much.
For more than a century, Californians have peered up to the universe from the telescopes of the Chabot Space and Science Center. Tucked away in the East Bay Hills, the museum hosts field trips, welcoming the next generation of astronomers, astronauts, and dreamers. It's this week's look at something beautiful. Oh, the joy of those children is just infectious. That's the end of our show for tonight. You can find KQED Newsroom online and on Twitter, or email us at knr@kqed.org. You can always reach me on social media at Priya D. Clemens. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you right back here next Friday night. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.